Good morning and welcome back. If this is your first video of Monday, we are going to be continuing to talk about the Pilgrims, which you read about on Thursday. You heard about the Mayflower Compact and how the Pilgrims came to America. And we're going to be continuing their story today. Do you remember where they were trying to get to on the Mayflower? Virginia, that's right. But it moved them further north and they ended up in Massachusetts. Plymouth, which would later become Massachusetts Colony. We're going to hear about that today. Actually, we're going to get to Massachusetts a little bit more later, but we're going to hear about Plymouth, the Pilgrim Colony, as they really start to lay their foundation of what eventually becomes Massachusetts. So let's begin. I'm going to present over to our book, but then I also want to read some from what your third grader needs to know. So we'll be doing a little of that too. So Plymouth, the Pilgrim Colony. Now, the Pilgrims had hoped to settle in Virginia, but the captain of the Mayflower had refused to go farther than Cape Cod. The cold, snowy days of winter had already begun. Our big question that we want to answer for this is, why was it important for the Pilgrims to work hard to prepare for winter? Which we should know why it would be so important, or what it seems like is probably going to be the answer to go along with what we've learned in Farmer Boy. Now, the Pilgrims spent most of their first winter in Plymouth Colony aboard the crowded, damp Mayflower. We read a good book, N.C. Wyeth's Pilgrims, at Thanksgiving time that talked about the conditions and how difficult that first winter was. I think that one really did a good job of explaining it. An icy wind blew off the ocean. On many days, the weather was so bad that the men could not work. During that first winter, half the Pilgrims died from cold and hunger, so half of them died. All winter, the Native Americans who lived near Plymouth stayed in the forest and watched the Pilgrims. They watched the Pilgrims bring supplies from the ship. They watched them chop down trees and saw logs into planks to build houses. Now, the first house the Pilgrims built was called the Common House. At first, it was used as a shelter and a place to store tools. Later, it was used as a place of worship. Now, when spring finally came, the Pilgrims moved off the Mayflower and into the houses. They began to plant crops. They had to work hard. Once the Mayflower sailed back to England, they were on their own. So the Mayflower is gone. They have to figure out a way in this foreign land to make a home for themselves. Now, during the warm summer, the Pilgrims tended their gardens. They were already preparing for the winter ahead. That is so smart of them. They need to do something like that, just like Almanzo and the Wilder family do. You need to store up for winter time. Now, one day, when basically going along with that, because in the summer, a lot of the crops are going to grow really well. In the winter time, there's other things to do, as we see with Farmer Boy, but there's not crops to grow necessarily, and so you need to store up for that time. Now, one day, a tall Native American warrior with long black hair appeared at the edge of the woods. Now, he walked boldly into Plymouth. The Pilgrims came out of their houses and in from the fields to see the visitor. "Welcome, Englishman," he said. "My name is Samoset." The Pilgrims were astonished that he spoke English. It turned out that Samoset had learned the Pilgrims' language from English fishermen who dried their nets and packed their fish along the shore. Now, Samoset spoke to John Carver, the first governor of Plymouth. He told the governor that the chief of the Wampanoag was coming to visit the Pilgrims. The Wampanoag lived nearby. Now, Samoset told the Pilgrims about the Native Americans who used to live in the place where the Pilgrims had built their village. These Native Americans had cleared the fields around Plymouth. A few years before, Samoset told the Pilgrims, a strange sickness had killed every member of that nation. So they'd done a lot of good work there, but then there's some sickness that killed a bunch of the people. Not a bunch, every member of the nation. The only person left in that nation was Squanto, a warrior. Oh, you guys remember Squanto? He's the first time he showed up in this book, but for those of you who know the Thanksgiving story fairly well, he is a big part of it. We're getting to that. Now, Squanto had been taken to England by fishermen before the strange sickness broke out. That's why he didn't get it. When Squanto returned, he was the only one of his people still alive. Now, friendship grows. A few days later, Samoset brought the chief of the Wampanoag to Plymouth Colony. With him were several warriors, including Squanto. The Pilgrims and the Native Americans exchanged gifts. Then they ate and drank together. Afterward, Governor Carver and the chief made a peace treaty that lasted for 54 years. Now, the chief and the other Native Americans left, but Squanto stayed behind to live with the Pilgrims. He showed the Pilgrims where to fish. He pointed out also which nuts and berries were safe to eat. The Pilgrims were very busy that first spring. Both boys and girls gathered mussels from the rocks in the shallow water at the edge of the sea. Not mussels like in your body, but like a clam kind of. They dug clams from the wet sand. They carried water and wood. They stuffed linen sacks with corn husks to make mattresses. Now, in the late spring, Governor Carver died. He was the head of the colony. Now, the Pilgrims chose William Bradford as their new colony, William Bradford. Now, Bradford was governor of Plymouth for the next 35 years. Wow. He even wrote a history of the colony that people today still study. Giving thanks. Now, in the fall, Governor Bradford gathered all the Pilgrims together. He told them that they had many things to be thankful for. They had finally found a place to worship God in their own way. And thanks to their Native American friends, their harvest would be plentiful. If they were careful, no one would go hungry during the next winter. So that is a really good point, and that really shows great virtue, that he was focusing on the things to be grateful for, and they're working hard to prepare for the winter so that the same mistakes from the year before aren't made again. Now, to celebrate, Governor Bradford invited the Pilgrims' Native American friends to feast with them and offer prayers of thanksgiving. The feast lasted for 3 days. That feast was a Thanksgiving celebration that has become an American tradition. We do not know for certain whether they ate turkey, but Governor Bradford did write that they had fowl, or birds, for dinner, as well as other kinds of meat. When we celebrate Thanksgiving today, we remember how the Pilgrims came to the Americas in search of religious freedom, how much they had to suffer, and how grateful they were for their new life. We also think about the Native Americans who helped them and who shared in their celebration. Okay, so that was Plymouth, and we're going to hear about Massachusetts Bay Colony tomorrow as more people come into this area of Massachusetts. Plymouth today is the state of Massachusetts, so that's why we're kind of transitioning over. Okay, I had a few parts of what your third grader needs to know to read to you guys next, to go along with what you have read before and then also for today. I wanted to start off by reading a little about the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags. Now, imagine you are a Pilgrim child, one of the lucky ones who made it through that first winter. It's a blistering March day and the leaves have not yet returned to the trees. You're hungry, but there's little to eat. Sometimes you see faces in the forest. They look, then dart away. What are they thinking? What are they planning? Will they attack? It would be pretty scary at the time. And it seems like there's nothing to be scared of, but you don't know any better if you're a young Pilgrim child. Then you hear a deep voice. Welcome, Englishmen. Who is that? Samoset, that's right. A man dressed in deerskin walks boldly into your camp. You can hardly believe your ears. An Indian man speaking English? Everyone gathers round. The man says his name is Samoset. He says he knows another who speaks English even better. Your governor gives him presents, and Samoset promises to return. Now, days later, he comes back and he brings more Indians with him. He introduces you to Tisquantum, who speaks English very well. So that's Squanto's name. Over time, Tisquantum teaches you and the other pilgrims how to plant corn, pumpkins, and beans. He shows you good places to fish as well. He guides you through the lands around Plymouth. He introduces your leaders to Massasoit, chief of the Wampanoag tribe. Soon, the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims sign a treaty of peace and friendship that will last for many years. So it sounds like, another interesting thing from here is that it was chickenpox actually that killed all of the people in Squanto's village. So they all died by chickenpox, except for Squanto, who was in England at the time. Okay, some of this is not really anything new, so I was just going to skip it around. Here's an explanation, a little bit more of detail of the Thanksgiving feast. So Massasoit with 90 of his men hunted in the forest and brought 5 deer for the Thanksgiving feast. And for 3 days, the Indians and Pilgrims feasted on specifically goose, duck, turkey, it says here, venison, cod, which is a type of fish, bass, again, stewed pumpkin, cornbread, wild onions, custards, and fruit tarts. The English danced jigs and sang the 23rd Psalm. The Indians chanted hymns and danced in ways that made the stone necklaces bounce on their chests. For these 3 days in the fall of 1621, they gathered in peace and friendship. We remember this gathering as the first Thanksgiving. So there's a picture of that first Thanksgiving, or illustration of what it might have looked like. Okay, so very cool. That is all for today. We are going to be reading about Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Puritans tomorrow. I will talk to you all later. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.